Hey, it did
Hey.
work. This is crazy. Man,
How's it
I'm so
going?
worried. Good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I love your beanie.
Well, it was because the hair was
It's
crazy.
ve-
It was a fashion choice
it's
more
very
than
Pacific Northwest of you.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
in my very Southern California way. Like, I'm sorry, is it 75? Okay, well, put a scarf on then, buddy. Um, That's the classic New England. I would laugh at Southern California when I first moved here, like 12 years
uh,
ago, and just be like, "Oh, okay, well it's 70, so we need gloves and a scarf." And
that's
oh,
right.
you're working on your screenplay. Oh, okay. Um, and then I was like, "But I am too." So anyway, dude. So how is this going down for you in Mississippi? Because like Southern California has like been on like a weird lockdown. Like we're
Yeah.
all special unicorns in Southern California. So when we're like, we're not like the rest of the country, it's fine. We like take that in stride as like a gold star. But what's it? What? Because Mississippi's been like in the news, but not necessarily really positively.
No. Yeah, I mean it's been a mixed bag. I think there were a lot of people asking. So at the local level, like mayor level, Mississippi, some of Mississippi's larger cities have Democratic mayors. Mississippi as a state has a Republican governor. And so in Tupelo, here in Northeast Mississippi, but if you're watching this and have no idea where Tupelo is, I didn't either before I moved here in 2015.
I didn't know it was a
It's
place either.
it's basically the Elvis was born here, and we have an Elvis festival every year that's like a really big deal that people
Oh
come
wow.
to from like around the world. Yeah. So Tupelo is right on the major highway that connects Birmingham, Alabama, and Memphis, Tennessee. And so our governor, Jason Shelton, is Democratic, and I think earlier than the governor Tate Reeves did anything, he basically did kind of the closing of non-essential businesses, social distancing stuff, and then eventually Tate Reeves did do kind of a, I don't know what he ended up calling it, whether it was stay at home or not, but that kind of a thing. So on the one hand, Mississippi is, it's very rural, so people are like social distancing is how people grow up. And a lot of
It's
people,
baked into the
but that's
community.
right. But then, but their church attendance is really high here as a percentage of population. And then where we live in Tupelo, like my wife works at the largest non-urban hospital system in the United States, which is based here, and she works in a clinic that's part of that. And
Oh,
so a lot of people come in from like hours around to get care, and then they come in for shopping, for work. So
right.
it's
Trip
this
to the
weird thing
city.
where, yeah, I mean, you got a town of 35,000 that during the day is like 100,000 plus people. It's just a really crazy influx.
Wow.
So, anyways, I've been working from home for a while. If anyone's watching, I'm an executive coach. I'm the co-founder of a leadership development company, and I do a lot of content creation. And Dan, I've known Dan for a long time, and just really appreciate you, and have learned a lot from him in areas of being a director and thinking about nonprofit storytelling. And so I've been working from home, and
Also
Heather was
looking
on.
dumb on the internet. Come on. Let's
We just
let's
all
not
have a lot
forget
to learn
that
in
one.
that area. That's right. So I've been working from home for a while, and hey, my dogs want to come inside, and we've been on maternity leave since January because we just had child number two, and so Heather was joking that she's been socially distanced for quite a long time. Uh, so yeah, I think our biggest thing right now has been I'm in the leadership in my church, and we've got folks that are really beginning to start missing work and losing jobs, and we've been
Yeah.
figuring out how we can financially help. And other
Yeah.
than that, a lot of my work has continued, and as a business, we're pivoting to try and do a lot of our leadership stuff online, which honestly we should have been doing for a while now. If I'm
Sure.
like, and so this is kind of like a nice kick in the pants, and I think we're entering basically a 2 to 3 month sprint to get a bunch of stuff online, host a
Hmm.
bunch of what we're calling web shops. So
Yeah.
that, anyways, that's how it is for me.
But yeah, because I think it is you have a very interesting way to look at it with Heather being in your house and like thinking through health systems and
Yeah.
because that's the craziest part when they talk about the health systems, like it's
Yeah.
just such a I never even thought about stuff like this before.
It's
I,
crazy.
I don't think anybody thought about stuff
No.
except for like the professionals in there. But it's
Yeah.
I think the tough part I'm having with it is like the is are we gonna crater for like a year? Because like life doesn't really work when you just pause for a whole year. Like
No.
and so thinking through that and thinking through work and thinking through like we're all doing home offices now. Like some of us have I've worked from the house forever.
Right.
So that's not that big a deal. But for me, but I know for everybody else is like, well, how does my work scale this way? How does it do it? So the question I have for you is like, how am I supposed to like steel myself now that I've got my three kids staring at me? I let them sleep in now. I feel like I'm becoming a better parent because they're like, we don't want to wake up till 10. And I'm like, why not? I don't care.
Yeah.
They're not going anywhere, so it's fine. But
Yeah.
how do I steel my mind to not like, I feel feeling the crush of the whole thing.
The crush of the whole thing. So flesh that if you don't mind. I'm going to engage you in coaching
Sure.
mode for a moment. Coaching mode engaged. um, how, when you say I feel the crush of it, flesh that out for me a little bit. What does that mean to you?
Okay, so I've lamented, like thinking about bad leadership. So I know good leadership, and I think we take it for granted. I know I take it for granted. Like, yeah, of course that person was stand up and they saw things and people weren't left in the cold, or if mistakes were made, they apologize. Like I've seen that good leadership over my life, and so now seeing that like we had warning and we didn't do it, and like
Yeah.
I mean the other part is like and tens of thousands of people, and then the response of even the American people, some people to say things like, well, social Darwinism is a thing. So, if they're not going to make it, it's fine. And
Yeah.
let's just not hurt my 401k.
Yeah.
And it super bummed me out. It has super bummed me out.
I see that. So there's a book that I read a few months ago called Navigating Polarities.
Mm-hmm.
And then Go Innovation, we're getting ready to launch our podcast probably this week. And
sweet.
I interviewed, and it's called Work Like a Human. And so it's all about being more human in life and work. And so the first episode, I interviewed the author of this book. And the idea of a polarity is basically describes how to practice both and thinking. And it's really timely to reflect on this because human beings, like our brains are, evolutionarily bad at both and thinking because either or thinking is basically a survival mechanism. So I need to know, is this safe or is it not? Right. Are these my people or are they not my people? Mm-hmm. And we want to make quick decisions. And so that's why like our amygdala flooding with defensive emotion happens way quicker than the other like logical part of our brain. Right. Switching into gear. So you have to train yourself, and coaching is a way that or your therapy, to make more rational decisions faster than emotional decisions. And so both and thinking. So to answer your question, I mean, you basically said, what I'm hearing is, how can I and others like me cope with some of this? Yeah. And so I think one way is to figure out how to practice both and thinking. And so as an example, right now, when I see a lot of like Facebook stuff going back and forth, I see some people who are on the one end of like, we need to open the economy. And I think probably like people are way overblowing the extent to which this is a problem. And I'm like the media is lying to us. So that's like this one end of the polarity. Right. The other end of the polarity is like, everything, like everything that I'm like the total opposite end would be like, it doesn't matter how much money we lose or how many jobs get lost or what happens to the global economy. We need to keep it shut. And it's almost like we need to try to prevent, like we want to try to have nobody else die from COVID-19. Right. And, we don't take that approach to any other public health issue. It'd be really interesting to imagine what would it look like if we took we want no one else to die. Like think about how many things would change. Like we would eliminate cars. Like we would decide all transportation needs to be public and mass transportation. Right. And it needs to be in such a form, and even then you're never going to not have accidents. So I think my point is, it's not that we need to swing back and forth from one extreme to the other. We need to find the author, Kelly Lewis, talks about finding a third way, which is almost a spiritual concept of you recognize each of these sides. It's not pros and cons. They have benefits and overuses. So like you could look at one side of the polarity and say, well, what is a benefit to, as an example, being skeptical of government overreach, being like not just immediately taking at face value what the media says, recognizing that it's really that a functioning free market economy has a pretty good historical track record of raising people's quality of life. Those are benefits.
Sure.
So overuses, if we're on that side of the pendulum for too long, we develop a rabid distrust of the media that ironically results in trusting really less than credible sources because they end up verifying our suspicions that we had in the first place. The suspicions weren't based on rational things. They're based on emotion. But then we find something that's an hour-long interview with random scientists who seem credentialed, and that makes us feel like we've now got rational grounds for our skepticism. You know, an overuse of free market economy is maybe it is social Darwinism. Maybe we're actually letting too many people get sick and die. So come to the other side. Let's call it like a very public health collectivist focus. So what's an upside to this? Like other-mindedness, caring for people that can't care for themselves. You know, being willing to put a face mask. You know, being willing to set some of my individual prerogatives aside for the sake of protecting the other. Well, there are some overuses of that as well, and a potential overuse is, you know. I saw someone make an excellent point the other day. You know, you can't blame the free market economy for failing when the government has essentially shut down the free market economy. So, like, on the one hand, you can say, hey, I wish some of these businesses had better cash reserves, but I don't know that that's necessarily an indictment of a free market economy.
Right.
So then you have to ask yourself, what would it look like if we lived both of these at the same time? Like, how would we show up in the world if we could integrate both sides of that polarity and honor the both and? It matters that we care about government overreach, and it matters that we have a government that's capable of having some kind of public health oversight in a way that probably state governments and individuals in the private sector can't do. It matters that we are rightly skeptical of media in some sense, but it also matters that we are able to discern what is skepticism and what is like conspiracy theoryism.
Right. Well, when the bats are taking over the 5G towers, the chemtrails are infecting us. We have to watch out for that.
What's the both and? How do we integrate both poles of that thing? And you can apply this to a lot of areas of your life, by the way. So think about like I work from home. I'm also now responsible for watching my daughters for most of the week while my wife, who's an essential employee, has gone back to work.
Right.
And so, you know, I could swing wildly between the poles of, oh my goodness, I feel like I'm unproductive and not worth anything because I'm not producing. Or on the other hand, like I'm just going to forget about my work and only focus on my daughters, which, you know, isn't financially sustainable. And honestly, it's not great for my mental health, because like I think having a vocation, you know, having a vocation and having meaningful work is just really important. And you know, I think for some people, their clear and main vocation is parenthood. And I think like when you see a stay-at-home mom that's just thriving and raising her kids, an example, or a stay-at-home dad, you can just tell it. And I'm not that person. Like and my wife isn't that person
but
either.
I think even those stay-at-home mom and dads go, oh, good Lord.
Absolutely. And that's because even the best vocation, it has overuses. If I'm in my work for, you can only stare at a video editing screen for so long before you hate it.
It's the crap sandwich.
That's right. So I think the idea is, first you recognize, am I dealing, a polarity is essentially two interdependent things that need one another over time for success. Mm-hmm. And so like we need to care about government infringement on religious liberty. We also need to care about American citizens over exercising individuality at the possible expense of collective public health. We can think those things together. They don't have to cancel one or the other out. And that relieves a lot of the tension, just that realization of like, oh, part of the reason I feel crazy is because I'm trying to solve a problem, when the reality is I should be trying to navigate the polarity, where both of these things and both of these people need one another. I need the person who's more skeptical of media than I might be, and they need the person who is saying, hey, it's not that you're skeptical of media, you're just choosing different kinds of media than I do, and I might be skeptical of the media. Like, we need each other to have that dialogue. So step one is naming the polarity and recognizing I'm an adult in a very complicated, unstable world, and so it's natural that I feel a lot of tension and frustration. So you're not crazy, you're not like less well-adjusted. Just own that you feel the tension of the polarity, and that is a consequence of living in a very complicated and unsettling world. The next step is name the polarity. So there's power and clarity in finding names for what are the things, what's the pair that's in tension. And then think about what would it look like if I freed myself of the need to live in either or and actually stepped forward into the both and. How would I name that and describe it?
Hmm.
And in the podcast episode where I interview Kelly about this, we play with this as it relates to uh, individual freedom and collective responsibility. And what she comes up with, she basically says that the face mask might be a way to demonstrate an integrated third way where it's an individual choice I'm making to wear a mask, but it's a choice that I recognize isn't really for me. Like wearing a face mask is actually for the benefit of others.
Right.
So that when I cough or sneeze, it stays in there and not out in the world and gets aerosolized or I could infect people. And so she suggests the face mask is face mask. And so it's helpful to find like a symbol because what we're talking about is a way of being. You're not looking for a specific word. And so you have to sort of feel it and think it. And so this idea of being the kind of person that says, despite how weird it feels to live in Western society where we don't walk around with face masks in public like people in Japan might when they get on a train when they're not in a pandemic, despite the weirdness, despite the discomfort, I'm going to live into the third way and put this on. And it's an expression of my individual freedom, but it's also on behalf of others. So in our homes,
Right.
in our work, what does it look like to navigate this polarity of like being there for my kids, trying to get time in for my work? So that's a polarity. You can't cancel out either of those, right?
Right.
That would be
Both are
unhealthy.
important. Right.
They're
Totally.
both important. And so how do I navigate that third way? Is there a rhythm? Is there a, you know, and so the next part is you have to talk about this. You have to have uncomfortable and vulnerable conversations with the people that you're engaging with.
You can't just shove it down.
Yeah, I mean, you can.
I mean, it worked for me
and
in
many
my
people
total
do.
30s. That's what I did. I just shove it down and
Yeah.
don't talk about it.
So Dan, I'm actually going to turn around you and ask you a question. Like
Yeah.
you know, you came into married life and parenthood later in life than a lot of people. And so navigating some of these polarities looks a little bit different for you, even if you don't put it in those terms. I'm curious for you, like, what does it look like for you to navigate some of this in a healthy way right now?
Well, I mean, yeah, like doing the cannonball into parenting, all of a sudden, teenage girls like was insane. And it's funny. I look back and I'm like, oh, just 3 years ago, and go, that guy was so naive. That guy thought it was gonna be. I think the tough part for me in parenting is I take things personally. I take it personally when like I just told you to do the thing. Why aren't you doing the thing? And then my wife will be like, because he's 10. And I'm like, but I told him. And she's like, but he's 10. So this is totally right age and stage stuff. But yeah, it's been wild. So, and I think the amount of work that I thought I would do versus what I am doing is also very different, which is pretty wild. So anyway, I think the big thing with that has been like, well, how do I keep the kids from it? We've been talking about this even as a church or whatever, because the younger kids are like, they went around, one of the elders of my church talked with his youngest and was like, okay, so we're going to go around for Easter and talk about like, what are we thankful for in the quarantine? And the kid, and like, this kid went, what quarantine? Like, because he didn't know, because this was just like,
oh yeah,
this is awesome and everybody's home and it's great. It's like vacation. And so he'll probably remember it that way. But like, we've been just talking about like, this super stinks. My 8th grader, you know, isn't getting her 8th grade graduation, and my 9th grader had like all these plans. And I can't even imagine if you're a senior this year, like, it hit right at like all the awesome stuff that happens at the end of senior year happens right
all
now.
the stuff you've been looking forward to since like
for 4
whatever
years,
August.
at least. So so we've been just talking about like, okay, well, how, and then the reality of like, well, how much time is enough to spend on school? Like, so my wife's a teacher, and you know, they're assigning things, which is great, and like they're keeping up, but it's like, well, do you need to spend 7 hours on school like you did in a normal school day? And it's like, well, no, not really. So so getting all that rolling, but then like we moved my office. I'm in the living room here now, like, because we changed the whole house around, because I was like, well, we need to like think differently for this next little, you know, session,
however long
or because and the thing is the more we keep talking about it, it's like you saw those reports yesterday of like universities thinking about what does it look like to not have classes on campus for 2020, like until next fall.
So
So
I
it's
read an article recently where they basically, Andy Crouch and his
Mhm,
team at Praxis Labs released it. And they
mhm.
basically said a lot of people are thinking of this as essentially a blizzard and we need to hunker down and then we'll come out of it. And he said it's probably more like an ice age, like a little ice age.
Yeah,
And he said, rather than thinking about 2 months from now, think 12 to 18 months from now,
right.
what does it look like? And so I think having that frame, what does it look like to put down some kind of roots of stability? Because we need, like, our brain is not, again, the holding the tension, the both and, it's hard to do that. And so
Hmm.
if you can, so decision fatigue isn't like,
Yeah,
it's a real thing. So your brain is subconsciously constantly trying to decide, well, is now the time that it's going to go back to normal? So if you can do something like just, hey, for the foreseeable, this is now where we are. We're going to set
right.
down new roots, new routines. And I've seen people on Twitter talking about, like, for their first graders. There's a woman, BuzzFeed featured her. She just said, we've just pulled them out. Like, we're not going to focus on this school right now. It doesn't make sense. We're like,
Hmm.
he's learning, but for the rest of his life, he's not going to remember the schoolwork that we did right now. He's going to
Right.
remember how we loved him. And I do think that's an example of living the polarity. It's not, you don't have to pit learning against, um, I don't know, against mental health.
And then
Like,
against non-learning.
right, yeah. I mean, like, learning against stagnation. Or
Yeah,
learning against doing nothing. And doing nothing is important sometimes. But the point is, like, maybe
right.
the third way is, for this season, our kids' learning is going to be by just being along with us, being loved, reading. And that's one example of, I think, it's this idea of carving out a sense of control. So the other thing I was going to say when you talked to me
Mm.
about this is, like, there there are so many things we cannot control.
Which
And
it's been very upsetting to realize how many things. That's
how,
been
yep,
super
there's
upsetting
just,
because I was like, I am the
yeah.
master of my domain. And then it's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
no, stay at home. And I'm like, but oh,
Yeah. So one way to think about this is, like, um, in some sense, this is an incredible time for people to grow in self-awareness. Like, oh my
hmm,
goodness, I didn't
hmm,
have a reason to have to confront the part of myself that felt like I was in control over so many things that are actually an illusion. Now I'm forced to confront that. And so
yeah,
I have a choice. Like I love a good Netflix show, but people use Netflix to numb processing
sure,
that they could be doing.
sure.
And so I think, if nothing else, like, it's free. Like, I like to coach people and they pay me for it, but it is free to sit down and, like, think and reflect and have a
Hmm.
conversation, like we're doing now, to grow in self-awareness and recognize, oh my goodness, I assumed so much control. And if you can shatter that illusion and look at the world as it is and yourself as you are, you're going to start setting yourself up. And so one way that I taught people through doing this is just make a list on one side of the paper, write down, here's a bunch of stuff that I can't control,
Hmm.
and start there, and then, like, stare at it for a little bit. So
Oof.
don't like move past it. Just write down whatever. And it's not like everything in the world, but, like, the first
The
8 things
spinning
that
of
come
the
to mind.
earth.
Like, I cannot control what happens in Dubai right now.
Right.
Like, just the first 8 things that come to your mind, especially as they impinge on your sphere and your
Right.
family sphere. And
When
then on
school
the other
goes
side
back.
of the, that's right. That's
Okay.
right. When school goes back, the emotions of my children,
Right.
how my clients, like, whether my clients are buying, what the
Hmm.
federal government does, when the stimulus check hits my bank account. Like,
Right.
you can't control this stuff.
Right.
Um,
I love that you just gave like huge, giant examples, but also like this is Tuesday, and like this, just like like whatever.
yeah.
Wait,
Oh, yeah.
it's not Tuesday, it's Wednesday. Okay. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
Right. No, I felt that way always. So,
yeah.
look at it and then process the emotions that come to mind. Like, what do you feel? And I think for
Hmm.
some people, they may even feel like avoidance. Like, I don't want to
Yeah.
think about that. So that's really interesting. Why don't you want that? Where does it come from? For a lot of people, it's family of origin. I'm not used to seeing my parents talk about uncertain things. I
Mm,
don't like the feeling of not knowing. I'm used to feeling like a very competent and in control person, and this list makes
yeah.
me feel the opposite of that, and
Yeah.
that's a threat to my identity. Okay, now we're uncovering the really important stuff. Once you process that, and only once you've really spent some time on that, then go to the other side of the paper and start to think, what are things that I can control?
Hmm.
And it may seem really banal, like the layout of our house, like how we use the rooms of our house,
Hmm.
but that is, like, sometimes the key to unlocking significant productivity and mindset difference this season, and it's something you can control. So, like, How we use the rooms of our house is something I can control. How I
Right.
spend whatever time I have is something I control. The kinds of conversations I try to initiate with the people I'm close to. There's like, you can make lists and lists. Some of these things are things that everybody can try to control, like my perspective on my situation. That's not really
Hmm.
control. I'm not saying control like flip a switch, right?
Yeah.
I'm saying basically strong influence. Like you
Or
can
within your
begin,
realm.
that's right. It is
Uh-huh.
within your realm, whereas something like what the CDC recommends is not within my realm.
Right. Right.
So anyways, that list often will give you the starting point for taking back a sense of so this is again, it's a polarity. On the one hand, there's people that need a sense of control to feel like they're fully themselves, and that's often dangerous. On the other hand, feeling like there's nothing in your control is totally disempowering and damaging, right?
Right.
And so I think the third
Right.
way is living with open hands while also like doing whatever you can. So in other words, not confusing what you do and don't control, and then trying to invest constructive time into things that you can
Mm.
control. So
Yeah.
that's one concrete self-coaching practice that I think will make people feel a little bit less crazy.
Yeah, that's huge, dude. That's absolutely huge. Where were you like 4 weeks ago? What was? I should have talked to you then. At the time, I was just
Right.
more like, "This is very sad, and I'm very
Oh, I think
sad." And
so. 4 weeks ago, we were okay. I think we were in disbelief that it could
yeah,
last for another 4 weeks.
right,
And even four
right.
weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, maybe it was like maybe I didn't even recognize how significant of a threat all this was going to be.
Hmm.
I'm trying to think calendar wise. 4 weeks, mid March. I don't. Yeah, I'm not sure. I remember. I think the watershed moment for a lot of Americans was when like the NBA canceled the rest of their season. I don't know what that. I mean, seriously. I mean, it's interesting what it
Yeah.
says about our culture, but like that
ESPN, what are we
when
gonna
that
do?
happened, people were like, "Oh, that's a lot of money that they're not going to get," and so
Right,
maybe it's not a hoax. Like
right.
maybe
Maybe
it's
it's not.
actually a big deal. Now, again, that's not to say like again, it's important to have a conversation about like when is government, what government overreach and civil like our
Hmm.
America is literally founded on people rebelling against
Overreach.
taxes, which for a lot of us today wouldn't even register on our or certain kinds of it wouldn't even register on our sense of like we're just used to paying a lot of taxes. And I think
Hmm.
some of that is mindset shift, some of that is culture difference, some of that is like we've just got different ways to use tax revenue. But like we shouldn't forget, like if you never think about, I wonder if the president saying he has total authority, as an example, is like a potentially dangerous executive precedent, or like I wonder if governors really should have the authority to just shut down a bunch. Like you shouldn't feel like a pariah for having that conversation. What we're doing is exploring the tension of the polarity. So
Yeah,
there's
just the
individual freedom,
curiosity
public health.
that you need to have
Yes, and if
for
you don't have
asking
that
enlightened questions.
curiosity, you're you're just going to accept something from
Right.
someone, and you're not going to necessarily have a way to wrestle with it appropriately.
Yeah. So with that, like there, we want to have those. I need to have those conversations, those questions, and even just like because I think it's hilarious, especially my Facebook feed. I've got on the one hand, there's all those doctors saying this is a thing, but then there's that guy who sees through the media. So I need no, those aren't the same. Anyway, but thinking through like questioning things. Like I live in a very blue state, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so some people will accept everything as it is. And I think it's weird that it's always along political lines. Like when we talk about
yeah.
this, it always immediately goes to like, well, you are red or you're blue, and there's no in between, or you're libertarian, which I don't know. Anyway, I'm just being silly, but it's just I think it's really important to start asking or asking those big questions even for myself of like
Hmm.
when my day how do I evolve, how do I get around this crush of either sadness or lack of control or whatever, like what does it look like for us to it really kind of I was having a conversation with somebody again from church a couple weeks ago and over the Zoom. But the question he said was, and he's a European guy, and he said, well, how do we get around, like, we need to be thinking, like, what does it look like to go to Disneyland with this happening and,
Hmm.
like, still be safe? Like, how
Hmm.
can that be a thing. Like,
Yeah.
let's start thinking like that. And that was a really huge unlock. Instead of like accepting, like, we're just going to sit at home and be sad for 18 months, or we're going to go out into the world and kill 1 million people
Yeah.
as a result of infection.
Right.
Like, what's somewhere that we can like live with it, and it feels like a weird sci-fi movie. Like, this whole time has felt like a weird sci-fi movie. You look at
Yeah.
the John
Yeah.
Hopkins sick map, it feels like the beginning of a Tom Clancy video game. And then when we're all going out with our masks and
Yeah.
whatever, and just walking down, I feel like I'm stuck in some weird sci-fi short or something.
Yeah.
It's just like a normal Pleasantville, but we all have masks on, and it's kind of strange. So again, question then that I have is like, if we're having those questions, the polarity shift, and we're trying to think about what does that look like for us, when we define those things, and then we're starting in the work, I am still having trouble like not thinking the big thoughts, right? Like, I'll be like doing my work and everything's fine, and then like kid will come in and be like, "Hey, I need help with the homework," and I'm like, "Right, because the school's not happening, and what's the school gonna do?" And it just like
Yeah.
all these bricks start falling off of just like, yeah, what are we doing? I mean, on the upside, I'm talking with my neighbors a lot right now, like
Yeah.
socially distanced from yard to yard, but like if they're out and about, I'm like waving and
Yep.
checking with people. Do you have what you need? Can I get you things? Can I like
Yeah.
I'm heading to the store? Can I get you stuff? And that's been really awesome. Most of the other stuff has been not so awesome. So
Yeah.
how I don't really know, like, how are we supposed to think through 18 months? Does that mean like you're saying, like thinking through what are we supposed to do?
Yeah. Well, and in the
Tell me
context
what to
of
do with
that,
my whole life. Rory, go.
yeah. In the context of that Praxis Labs article, what they were basically telling businesses and organizations and nonprofits, think about your pitch deck. Typically, in the first couple of slides, you have your why, which is the
Right.
bridge of relevance to the people
Sure.
you're talking to, and you're not
Right.
you're not talking about your product yet, yourself. It's just like, here's the thing in the world that we're trying to go after. And they basically said you should probably throw out everything else, like leave your why, but totally go
Wow.
back to the drawing board of how you feel, of what the main deliverable is that you say and then how you're going to bring that about. Because if you, the argument in a nutshell is, we could be wrong. We think this is going to be a sea change economically and
Yeah.
socially, and even if we're wrong and you do execute this pivot, if stuff snaps back, you already know how to do business as usual.
Right.
So there's sort of like not that much of a risk in actually innovating what could maybe end up living comfortably alongside your core business as another vertical, as an example, or just another delivery mechanism. Now, that looks different for different people and different organizations. For us, on a very personal, individual level, a couple of ideas. First, you touched on this without using the word. I think finding whatever it is you can be grateful for. Gratitude changes the way your brain operates on like a neural pathway level. There's research about this. So it's not just a healthy spiritual or emotional practice. It's actually something that can change the way your brain functions. So finding some time every day, and this is a great activity to do as a family. Like we as a family, we will verbalize what we are thankful for, because we have to find it. That's good. The other thing I would say is stress and coping. So everyone has stress. Even when you think your life is great, you have some stress. And right now we have, like, in some cases, exponentially more than we normally do. The key is to recognize that stress always, it's sort of like that law of thermodynamics, where like matter is never really created or destroyed. Like stress, in my opinion, is never really destroyed. It goes somewhere. In other words, we all cope with it.
Right.
The difference is there's two axes here. Is it conscious or unconscious?
Okay.
And is it healthy or unhealthy? And you could almost set up like a four box, right? Like there's like conscious healthy and conscious unhealthy. There's like unconscious healthy and unconscious unhealthy coping. So the key is, I want to develop unconscious healthy coping habits. But often most of us have unconscious unhealthy coping habits. So think of a lot of examples, like maybe somebody just takes it for granted they don't even recognize that between the hours of like 5 and 9, they have 4 glasses of wine most
Right.
evenings out of the week.
Right.
And they don't recognize that, like, that's actually the definition of alcoholism, is like having
Right.
more than 2 drinks a day for most
Right.
people. And so most people who have 4 drinks a night wouldn't necessarily think of themselves as an alcoholic, because we have mental models around what an alcoholic thinks and acts like. But that's a self-limiting belief. So step 1 is, oh, that is an unconscious and probably unhealthy coping mechanism. So the self-awareness of what I do with that, and then figuring out how can I develop unconscious healthy habits. So like a trigger that lets me know, maybe my trigger is I need to go sit and listen to music, or I need to go like do some body weight exercises and some push-ups, or like whatever. I need to go watch something beautiful. The point is, at first it needs to be conscious. So you need to pull from the realm of unconscious, unhealthy, and force it to be conscious and healthier, and then get it to the, like, it's unconscious. I can automatically cope, and that's never finished. We'll always need to we will always need to wrestle with that, like being aware of how we're coping and then trying to push it into coping in a more healthy way. But I think just recognizing that fundamentally we all experience stress, and we all cope with it, whether it's conscious or unconscious, and whether it's healthy or unhealthy. So pushing that coping into the ideally, first you try to become conscious of the unhealthy and the healthy, and then and then change the balance. I want more healthy, less unhealthy. And then once I get there, I'm going to try to make it unconscious so that it's a habit. And it's sort of like putting that part of your well-being on autopilot to a certain extent, which takes time.
Yeah, because you made that one choice, then you don't deal with the ramifications of 47 other bad choices.
That's right.
So yeah, that's pretty wild. It made me think of, while you were doing that, I was looking around. Do you know who Oren Klaff is?
Uh-uh.
Oh, you gotta check his stuff out. He has a book called Pitch Anything.
How do you spell it?
Oren Klaff, Klaff.
Okay.
I remember. Yeah, he's ridiculous. I read his book in a day, or in a couple of hours, because I was doing a pitch for a project, and I read his book. I reframed everything that I was doing, and I pitched in 15 minutes and walked out with a 20 grand check, which was really, I'm not kidding you, 15 minutes. I was like, did this just happen? Did I just learn magic?
Wow.
Anyway, because I was like, you will give me the money. And they were like, yes. And I was like, really? Anyway,
this is the money you've been wanting to give away.
Quick, run, get out of here. Anyway, so, which is wild. But he talked about, he sent an email out this week, and it was talking about pitch decks specifically, and the why, like sitting with the why. And it's like, why now, problems we solve, what we do, how, proof, and then economic value is like the classic way to do things. And I just think it's kind of interesting, like now thinking through, like, okay, so this is what is things gonna, and I feel it very much more on the nonprofit side of, like, guys, this is 12 months of cycle. If we have a 30% unemployment rate, which could be cratering.
Yep.
Well, nonprofits are going to be asked to do crazy things like do more work with less than ever before, and they have to do it. So what is that going to even look like? I don't know, but we have to, like envision it. So I thought of that, and then I also thought of just that it's amazing how that be curious Bugs Bunny idea sits in my brain of, like, not being martyr with my creativity, but being more like trickstery. Really helps me kind of unlock things. Like it's funny when I'm getting super stressed out with the kid stuff, and like my expectations are super weird because I'm taking it personally because why didn't he, take the trash out, like I said? And how was he losing his brain? Well, because you have an ADD kid who's just a kid, is one of it. But it's funny how the word adventure, like, makes me go, oh, right, it's an adventure. Like, I don't know what's going to happen, and it's supposed to be that way. So not that I want to this is an adventure that we're on, and I don't want to undergird the ramifications of what the new normal is going to be. But thinking through, like, and I keep asking my kids, like, I think it was 3 weeks before I actually got them to say things like how they felt. And I kept asking, and they were just like, what are you doing? Like, they just sounded like I was being such a weirdo for them, because I'm like, so how are you feeling? I mean, it's kind of strange. And they'd be like, yeah, it's fine. It's
Uh-huh.
not a big deal. I just talk to my friends on FaceTime. It's cool. And be like, all right. So but because of like everything getting canceled, and then like, what does the summer look like? And then, like thinking through what does it look like if school doesn't start back up?
Yep.
And what does it look like? Like we keep getting these things. So it is kind of, well, a super bummer,
Yeah.
but also what the idea of this new normal. How do we make stages to, or how do I plan for, like, from a production standpoint? Like everybody was
Uh,
talking like, okay, so LA shut down for production for about 6 months. So like everybody's in massive trouble when it comes to
yeah.
actual production. Post houses right now are going insane. They have a
Uh,
ton of work, but that's only going to happen for the next like 2 months, and
right.
then they're done.
Yep.
Um, Animation still going. No problems
Right.
actually there. So that's cool. But the rest of production, everybody's just like, and it's funny. With a few writers forums, and they're just like, yeah, be productive and write your script. And then they're like, everyone's like, when Newton went into when he was on lockdown, he came up with calculus. And then when Shakespeare
Uh,
came up,
yeah.
when he wrote Macbeth, and my 15-year-old went, wow, that's pretty good. So what are we doing? And I went, okay, so that's two examples in all of history. All of the
Yeah.
people that have ever existed, that's two.
Yeah.
There's only two. She was like, oh, right. And I was like, so we need to think like, we need to be a little,
Yeah.
nicer to ourselves.
So
Um,
I want to highlight a couple of things you said because they're super
yeah.
important. So this first earlier, you basically said, I think of it as an adventure. And it's basically it's a coaching technique that could be called reframing.
Mm,
And the idea is that we don't just neutrally process all of our data. We have mental models that influence how we think about things. And those mental models, it's again a survival mechanism because if you had to constantly, like if your brain had to teach yourself what a chair is every time you saw one over and over again, right? So a lot of times,
you'd be
like
tired.
I've been sitting at this table, but if and for like all morning, right, for a couple calls. If I walked away and you said I need you to list everything that's on the table, I wouldn't get it because I've been tuning it out. It's a
Right.
like my mental model doesn't. I don't need it.
Hmm.
And so reframing is don't take for granted your perspective on something. Recognize that there's a distance between a thing that you're perceiving and your perspective on that thing, and then play with that distance. Like, what if I thought of this in the opposite way? Or what if there
Right.
was a better word to use? How would that affect? And again, it's not like pop psychology weirdness. It's a legitimate, like, so as an example, I was coaching a friend a couple of weeks ago, and he was looking at an online master's program,
Hmm.
and it's only $3,000.
Okay. For a
And
master's
so
class, that's
he
not too bad.
for
Or the
yeah
whole
and
program? The whole
the
program?
yes, the whole program. He's a
Dang.
missionary, so it's like discounted for missionaries. And I
Right,
said,
right.
from one perspective, and that was the perspective he was giving me, it was like, wow, that is an incredible bargain, a master's for $3,000. And so I talked to them and I said, look, what if you thought about the next like 40 years of your life? If you were going to spend $3,000 on anything right now to set you up for success in the long term, like you're going to invest $3,000. It's not chump change.
Right.
Is that the best investment? Like if there was something better, you just wasted $3,000 on a
Right.
master's that you don't need. That's an example of that perspective reframe. And he was like, oh, right. Like it just seemed like a bargain, but
Right.
it's sales psychology. You walk in, it's like 70% off, and you're like, well, okay, but you're still spending money that you may didn't need to spend, right? It's the
Right.
same. It's a
By
perspective
saying
shift.
yes to this, you're saying no to a whole bunch of other stuff.
That's right. You're saying
Okay.
no to other things, and then so that's one thing you mentioned. I think is just so important is reframing. And then, oh man, and I knew this was going to happen. I should have been taking notes.
Sorry.
You were talking about something else. You said something else after that I was like, oh, that's so helpful, and just it's gone. So sorry,
Feelings,
but
keeping ourselves in isolation, being kind to
feelings,
ourselves.
how you feel. Yeah. So no, no,
Nope. Okay.
not
It's
there.
gone.
That
It's
was an
gone.
extra helpful effort at fishing that out, but
Oh,
it's
right.
gone. If I think of it, I'll say something. But yeah, so
Okay.
anyway, that reframing, that's something that it's another thing that's within our control. So reframing,
Right.
we have the ability to reframe our circumstances and to reframe our responses. And at first, again, it requires conscious effort. And it
Right.
feels like we're putting on a false face. So to say this is an adventure feels inauthentic. And so I tell people, like, I don't like authenticity is not an inherent good because who I authentically am right now may not be the best version of myself. Like who I'm authentically, like right now, who I am authentically is somebody that gets impatient with a 2.5-year-old when she doesn't immediately listen to my instructions. That is not reasonable.
No.
Like that's who I am authentically, but I do not want to show up in her life or my wife's life as my authentic self. So I need to make a conscious effort to put on something that feels inauthentic for the sake of recognizing that my standard for my behavior is not some internal authenticity. It's actually like there's something I'd like to live up to that's a better version of myself. And I want to push toward that. And so in this time,
so that's not denying your feelings. That's not, that's feeling
you acknowledge
those
them.
feelings.
You acknowledge them and say, here is who I am. I can't ignore it. I don't want to rationalize it or push past that. I must face it. And that's self-awareness. And then the next step of self-management or self-control is, what can I do with those feelings? And if I work hard on doing different things with those feelings long enough, it may actually influence what I feel. Because we don't have direct control over our feelings. It's data. Like I got angry. Like my daughter didn't force me to be angry, but also it wasn't a conscious choice to be angry. It's sort of this weird in between. It's a both and. Like I can't like directly, I didn't like decide I'm going to respond in anger, but also she didn't force that. So there's this weird, like, I'm not fully in control, but I can influence it. And I think when you learn to put better coping mechanisms in place over time, that will end up influencing the better version of yourself that can come out.
Totally. Well, Rory, this has been awesome. Thanks, man. We've been talking like an hour. What the crap?
It's so good to see your face. I really appreciate you having me on with this. And if anyone is listening and you've got, like, if you do, so I was vice president of marketing in a nonprofit, as you know, until September last year. And so I'm just going to go ahead and put in a plug for Dan. Dan is an incredible thought partner for thinking through how nonprofits frame what they do and why that matters for the sake of getting more awareness, more partners, and more money. And that need is only going to increase as we enter increasingly turbulent economic times. So I'm here for you if you need a coach, a thought partner in process. Dan is here for you if you need somebody to help you with especially nonprofit storytelling. And I understand, Dan, that you've been giving away some consulting. You've been giving away some phone calls, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, I can only control this much, right? So
right.
It's like, okay, this is bad. And I was just like, well, how about here's my book and here's a phone call and let's figure it out. Because I can't, like, if I was an ED right now, executive director of some sort of nonprofit, I'd be like, I mean, immediate need to change my
We are going down the rabbit hole, and it's only going to get weirder.
It super is, but I mean, so it's all about the buttress. It's all about how we buttress it right now, which is a fun word to say, for the record. Also,
are you saying you like big buttresses, Dan?
Yes, I cannot lie. Notre Dame has got it.
Sorry, that's the worst joke I've made all week.
Right, so and bad. The thing is I'm like, yep, let's just go with it. Let's just do it. Yeah, that's a good idea in a corporate setting. Hey, guess what? This is a corporate setting now. This is a corporate setting.
That's right. This
is my most favorite meeting room ever. So anyway, but dude, thanks so much for being on. Check out Rory if you get a chance. Follow him and stuff on his Instagram because it's super rad. And he dude, you're all over the place. You're like creating stuff, and you're just like killing it.
I'll put a plug for our YouTube. So we launched a YouTube channel. My company is called Go Innovation, Go Innovation. And we just threw up a bunch of videos, including our first 2 episodes of our podcast called Work Like a Human, which I host, and they're on YouTube in video form. We recorded some Zoom calls, and I added a little bit in the front and back. And then we're working on getting it into actual like podcast delivery places. So that's coming. But if you go to YouTube, search Go Innovation. We don't actually have enough subscribers yet to get a custom URL. So if you would, feel free to subscribe for coaching and leadership and becoming a better version of yourself type content.
Well, I'll do it right now. All right, dude. Okay.
Hey, thank you so much. It's so good to see your face, man. I appreciate you a lot.
No problem. It's good to see you. I'll catch you later.
Peace.